Welcome back, everyone. I'm Conan Smith, the president and CEO of the Michigan Environmental Council, and this is Capital Connection. Our topic today is going to be recycling in the bottle bill. Super excited to talk to you all about it and to welcome two guests. First time with us is Representative Christine Morse. Representative, thank you for taking some time out of your day to talk about your new legislation, which is critical importance to us. You represent the Kalamazoo area. I don't know if you've been subjected yet to Joe Bauer, our development director, who is active Kalamazooan. Is that how you would say that?
I'd go with it, sure.
Sure. We have some love for your neck of the woods in our shop. I'm really glad to have you with us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
And of course, Sean Hammond, who is the policy director at MEC. Sean, welcome back. I think I've talked to you about this topic, every other week for the last 2 or 3 years. This will be fun to hear the updates and the perspective that we're bringing to it in this legislative session, which is a little bit different. And we are also going to talk a little bit today about some solid waste reforms that MEC and others have been working on over the last many years, particularly with Michigan Recycling Coalition, our lead partner on this stuff. So good stuff to talk about today. But before we get into it, Representative, you are new to the legislature and thus probably new to most of our audience. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, like how you got into politics and why these environmental and conservation issues matter to you?
Well, thanks. I'd love to. So yes, I'm Christine Morse. I represent the 61st District, which encompasses the city of Portage, the townships of Prairie Run, Schoolcraft, Texas, and Ashtimo. And I am a native Michigander, grew up on the east side near Ann Arbor in a little town called Tecumseh. I went to state and Wayne State for law school, moved around the country after that. My husband was in the Navy for 11 years. So we've lived both coasts, Japan and the north side of Chicago. So was very grateful for that experience, but very happy to return to our home state back in 2010. We located here in Kalamazoo. Where I've been raising my children and, just loving life here in Michigan. My path to politics has been an interesting one. I actually studied political science at Michigan State, but because I wanted to go to law school, that was to me the classic route. So that's what I did. Did do an internship with Lieutenant Governor Connie Binsfeld back in the early 90s.
Nice.
So that was a great, experience. It's very surreal now to be on the House floor when I was, back in her office back in the day, and now I'm working there. So, back in 2011, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, which I really think I tell people that pretty often because it's just part of my journey and part of, I think, what pushes me really to not to jump into something and go after something because life is short and there are no guarantees. It sounds like a cliche, but it's true. And so I did do a breast cancer charity here locally to raise awareness about breast cancer in young women, youngish women. And then I ran for county commission in 2018 here in District 9 because I didn't feel that the person we had representing us was transparent, accessible, listened to the voters in any way, had no outreach. And I just didn't feel represented our interests. And so I decided to run and knocked a ton of doors and sent a ton of mail. And what we were saying to people really resonated. People really value someone that is ready to listen and to be as transparent as possible in what we're doing here in local government and state government. So my time on the county commission showed me just how much the state impacts what we do at the local level, how many of our resources are dependent upon the state. Which I knew to some extent, but obviously, living it and making those decisions really amplifies that. And so knowing how important it was to have someone, again, who truly represented our interests, who valued education funding, who valued our environment, and who valued healthcare for people, I decided to go ahead and run. And, flipped a seat that MERS did some research on and says it hasn't been held by a Democrat in 102 years. So a pretty big flip. The reason I focus on environment as a part of my platform is that I have 3 children and we have to leave this earth to them. And and future generations. And it is an important responsibility that we should all be taking seriously. So I'm so thrilled to be on the Energy Committee in the State House because it really gives me the opportunity to weigh in on, ensuring that our environment is taken care of and that we are being proactive in leaning into green energy, which we should be doing as a state.
So you and Senator Sean McCann have introduced a revised version of Michigan's bottle bill law. Sean, as we get into this, can you give the group a quick background on the current law, how it came to be? We celebrated in 2020 our Milliken Award winner, Bill Rustum, who I believe was the campaign manager for the first bottle bill effort. Is that right, Sean?
That is right. So this came about 45 years ago this year. Now it feels like just it feels like just a little bit ago we were celebrating the 40th anniversary of the bottle bill. But that's just how fast time goes in Lansing sometimes. But this is something that was really worked on by Governor Milliken and was attempted to be passed through the legislature, but ultimately failed by only a slim margin. And at that point, the governor was very, very interested in making sure this did happen. So under the 1963 Constitution, it allows for, that we're still operating under, it allows for citizens' initiatives to pass laws. And the governor gave the ability to Bill Rustum to run this campaign. They got the signatures. They ran the campaign along with Michigan United Conservation Clubs. The two of them were really kind of the founders of the Michigan bottle bill. We were the second state to implement a bottle bill, and by doing it through the will of the voters. And to this day, we still have a large interest in the bottle bill. Polling puts 90% approval of our bottle bill system. We were a leader at the 10-cent mark. Oregon just recently moved up to match the 10-cent deposit. So we're one of just a couple states that has that large of a deposit on our cans and bottles. And it at the time it helped serve 2 purposes. One was on the pollution front, and 2 was it helped stake out Michigan as a recycling leader at the time. Between that and then the city of Ann Arbor starting a curbside recycling system, we were way ahead of the recycling game at that time.
So the legislation or the ballot language basically says we're going to put a 10-cent deposit on a pop can. That's going to serve as an incentive for you to recycle that can. And it's had it's a simple idea, but it's had tremendous impact, right?
Absolutely. We see this across the Great Lakes. Alliance for the Great Lakes, one of our member groups, sponsors beach cleanups every year. And you can see just from that data that when the 2 states in the Great Lakes that have bottle bills, Michigan and New York, the amount of beverage containers they find on the beaches are substantially lower than in our other neighboring states that do not have a bottle bill. So we can just see it, you can see it from the data and you can see it with your eyes. I've had the opportunity to travel the United States and to some other countries that don't have bottle bills. And the litter along the sides of the roads is much more full of these beverage containers than it is in Michigan.
I live next to a schoolyard and for middle schoolers, and not too infrequently back in the day when kids used to go to school, I'd find water bottles and juice bottles, that sort of thing, tossed into my backyard or across the fence. Representative Morse, there's no return on those kinds of materials, and you hope to change that.
Well, absolutely. In learning more and more about, number one, our system has been very successful, and especially the 10-cent part of it is, the most successful in the country. It really seems to be that factor that encourages people to return those bottles. And so I just want to highlight a few of the changes that this new bill would bring. So what we know is that the current bill only is with respect to carbonated beverage containers. This bill would expand that to all containers except for milk containers. And what that represents is a 34% difference in what we could be recycling. And as we all know, with some recent events that have happened in our state, including the lead and water crisis in Flint and PFAS and other locations, that people have been using bottled water in lieu of their, faucets. And that just, really exponentially increases the amount of output. We also know that unfortunately, Michigan takes on a lot of other people's trash and uses our landfills, which is to our detriment. So this would really pull that much more trash out of the system. This bill also allows for regional recycling centers to be set up. And something that I know a lot of people would like to see is universal recycling. So that location that could recycle your bottle, it doesn't matter if you bought it from there or not, as long as it has that Michigan stamp on it. So those are some of the key differences between the current law and what this new law would do.
One of the emerging challenges that we're observing as well is the proliferation of plastics pollution. Microplastics in the Great Lakes, in the fish that we eat, in the rainwater that sprinkles across the state. So getting our hands around how we deal with single-use plastics is really critical to the environmental future and conservation future, not just the state, but the planet. And so much of that are these bottles, the juice bottles, the water bottles, the milk bottles, those sorts of things that we can recycle and reuse. And Michigan has a great system for doing that with aluminum. Why can't we extend that to these other beverage containers? Sean, as we think about the system and the way it works, there's a question in the chat about what happens with what they call the sheets. So I go and I buy a 12-pack of Diet Coke, and I only return 11 of those cans for some reason. Like I've cut one of them open that I'm using for a craft at home or in my barbecue or something like that, and that's not returnable anymore. What happens to that dime that I don't get back?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, the sheets, as they're called, get split. About 25% goes to retail establishments. So the storefronts who are taking back bottles and cans, they are the ones they get on essentially kind of as a proportion of the amount of cans that they handle. It goes back to them as a sort of handling fee. The other 75% goes to Eagle and to the contaminated site program specifically. It gets split a little bit further from there, but it's mostly a vast majority goes to help fill in our contaminated site cleanup program. So this is in addition to the Renew Michigan money that got passed a few years ago to help fund this program. This is going to address those orphan sites and sites of contamination around the state and help clean them up. The new bill changes that a little bit. It still gives a lot of money to contaminated sites, still gives retailers a chunk of money, but it shifts it up to be, because there's more bottles in the system, we'll have more money in this fund. And so we'll be able to continue to fund contaminated sites at the same rate they are today, while also giving money to statewide recycling programs, giving money to local governments specifically for contaminated site cleanup and for recycling programs, and also giving both retailers and distributors a cut of the money in a way that's a little bit different than before. Instead of going off a percentage, it goes as a amount per bottle. Because right now there's kind of a weird incentive where if you actually if we recycle less of these bottles, retailers get more money. So there's the potential weird incentive on the bottle bill. Whereas this new shift, setting it up as you get money per bottle handled, gives that a incentive to get more and more bottles into into your store. So that is that's kind of the old to new, but it's, it's still going to fund the help offset retail costs, and it's still going to go to contaminated sites. But with more containers in the system, we can just do so much more.
The money going back to the retailers becomes really important when you learn that they are responsible for the installation of the recycling facility itself, right? And so we hear concerns and complaints about how frequent or how regular. I'm not sure what the right word here is. I just lost it. Where these systems are, right? How far you have to drive in order to return your bottles. Whether they get full when they're being used, so how frequently the staff at the retailers are able to service them, and whether they're sanitary, right? Like, so some of those places get pretty messy. I imagine that using some of the Escheats money to support retailers in implementing this can also help with equipment upgrades and services that make the whole system better for everybody. Is that right?
Well, I would say, yeah, they have to do a lot of the quote unquote dirty work. And so, yeah, of handling, the first site that is handling all these recycled bottles and materials. So, I think that is the right direction to go. And we need to include them in the process in the discussions on this bill, so they are a part of it, because they are taking on a lot of responsibility. I do see that a couple people have asked, what does this include? Yes, it does include plastic bottles, and yes, it does include liquor and wine, glass, and plastic. So it's all of that is included in the bill.
When you say plastic bottles, can you go into a little bit more about what kinds of plastic bottles? Sean, we've talked about things from oil cans to milk bottles to water bottles to pop bottles. Does your bill, Representative Morse, run the gamut, or does it focus on beverages? Where's the line?
I'm sorry, yes. So I should be more specific that it is beverage containers. So please continue to recycle those things in your local, pickup, those laundry, detergent and whatnot. But this does only relate to beverage containers specifically.
Sean, there are a few questions that we've gotten about the recycling process, and Michigan has a pretty great and almost unique system where two companies, one that builds the machines that we put our bottles and cans into, and one that helps with the recycling process, and then those companies got together and formed a third company to get the bottles from the return center to the recycling center. So we have a really neat cyclic system. Can you talk a little bit about how that process works? Like, what happens to those materials? Do they get crushed? Do they get torn up? Like, and how do they get back into reuse?
Yeah, so this is actually one of the biggest benefits of the container deposit system, the bottle bill that we have, is we are producing a very, very clean and efficient stream of recycled materials. So, you either go to a bigger store and you put it into kind of the reverse vending machine at a Meijer or something like that, or a lot of smaller stores have smaller pickups, but the big stores, they go into this logistics system, and that's really what Conan was describing. Is it's a company that's founded specifically to handle bottle bill logistics for large stores, just because of the sheer volume. So the material gets collected. And it's sorted already, through your machine. It's sorted into glass, plastic, and aluminum. And then it goes, is processed a little bit further and baled. Either, you can mostly, I believe it's shredded in a lot of cases. A lot of times it goes out whole to be processed somewhere else. It kind of all depends on what the customer is looking for. But this is a very, very clean stream, unlike our single stream recycling. So what you put in the curb has higher rates of contaminations just by the nature of, you're intermixing all your recyclables. This plastic is with plastic, glass is with glass, aluminum is with aluminum, to the point where actually glass coming through the bottle bill system is valuable, whereas glass going through the single stream recycling system is often a negative value product. Where you're either having to pay or get very, very little money in order to ship it out. So that's kind of the big difference in what this means for stewardship goals for like individual companies. So a lot of companies have put out, we need to use X amount of recycled content in our bottles. And, you see Nestle has done this. You see Coca-Cola has actually is going to be introducing, I believe, 100% recycled bottle this summer. So these brands are trying to do this, but they need enough clean material that's food safe, ready to go. And the bottle bill provides a steady stream of food safe, uncontaminated plastic, glass, and aluminum. So this is one of the really, really efficient systems in recycling there is. And it definitely has, it's not going to work for every last material out there necessarily, but for the beverage containers, it is a really, really good system that we have going in Michigan.
I'd like to ask the two of you to do a little prognostication. In the past, expansion efforts for the bottle bill have faced resistance from retailers and from some of the bottlers themselves. Sean, you just mentioned there's been a change in attitude at the bottling companies around recycled materials. Are you seeing greater interest in partnership around this legislation than we've seen in the past?
So, we, for the first time, and I think ever, I can say, I don't know of another time that this happened. We had a work group last year where everyone actually, every stakeholder, retail, small retail, bottlers, distributors, environmentalists, recyclers, we're at the table together. And we talked through this. Now, we didn't come out with an agreement for sure, but there is a change. I think I've been sensing it. I feel there's a change happening from the top levels on down. There's more and more interest in looking at bottle bills as a solution to this really big global plastic problem that is happening. In fact, Nestle put it out an op-ed and put a line in the sand and said, we support bottle bill legislation. They did that in 2019. They put it in a Connecticut newspaper, and it made the rounds across the board. So they were really one of the first companies to stake that out. Coca-Cola has kind of softened, and I believe they supported the UK bottle bill. Brands are shifting. I don't know if it's there yet in Michigan. I'm hopeful to continue talking with a lot of our partners that represent retailers and bottlers and distributors and continue these dialogues. But there's a hopeful sense that something is shifting that wasn't there, even 10 years ago.
Representative Morse, I've heard you talk very intentionally about efforts to reach across the aisle and build the partnerships that are necessary for policies like this to advance. How are your colleagues in the legislature on the Republican side reacting to this?
Well, really what I can tell you, there hasn't been a ton of discussions with them yet. But Representative Howell, who chairs the Natural Resources Committee, was hoping that it would land in his committee. Unfortunately, it didn't. They sent it to regulatory. And so, I need to reach out to the chair there and, just sort of have a discussion. It's a challenging year it's going to be a challenging session in the legislature. If you've been paying attention, you can see that there has not been a lot of collaboration at all. But I think if we bring the stakeholders to the table and you have business, interested, it's very similar with like the electric vehicle industry, right? Where you have now Ford and GM saying, we are doing this, are you coming with us, to help build them the infrastructure that they need. So it's a similar thing where if we do have, the bigger business coming to the table and saying, okay, we're ready, we understand that we need to do this for our environment, then we'll have an easier, way through the negotiations. But I've been working on reaching out to my Republican colleagues and getting to know them. I'm a new legislator, so that takes time, but hoping that we can bring some along for the ride with this one.
Sean, there was a question posed by Nishat Kaleen, who is our partner in the city of Detroit, who works on their recycling program. Curious about the impacts of bottle bill expansion on municipal curbside recycling programs. That's been an issue that you've had to grapple with aggressively for the last couple of years.
Yeah, and it's certainly a question that's not easily answered. So, it is it's certainly a question, especially with recycling markets being what they are after China's sword policy came into place and really hurt our exports of, frankly, pretty contaminated recycling. So we should be doing better anyway on getting contamination out of the single stream recycling system. But our bottle bill system is also quite efficient, and it's not a either or proposition. Oregon has a fantastic recycling rate and has a bottle bill. Minnesota has a fantastic recycling rate and is looking and has had conversations about adding a bottle bill to get off their plateau. They haven't yet for various reasons, but that's one of the things they're discussing. In Michigan, we have a terrible recycling rate and we have a bottle bill. So it's kind of their independent actors to some degree. And yes, this would take some valuable aluminum out of curbside for sure. But it would also remove a lot of that negative value glass that contaminates a lot of the other recyclables. And then plastic ends up being kind of a wash when you look at the whole thing. There's been studies kind of looking at that out of Canada and other places. So it's not a cut and dry answer, and it certainly is something that we are continuing to engage with the Michigan Recycling Coalition and their members to help sort out some of these really strong discussions that need to be had. But from our perspective, we think both systems have a lot of merit. And again, the bottle bill is primarily an anti-littering tool. I think that's the one thing that MEC has approached this for our 40-year history, is that this is a really, really good anti-pollution tool that happens to also have really good recycling benefits. And getting more of these bottles out of our lakes and streams by putting more and more of them into the system is a huge benefit that also does benefit the recycling of those containers on top of everything else.
John, I really appreciate you asserting that environmental and conservation benefit, which is why the Environmental Council is here. I also want to raise up Representative Morse. There are some great consumer benefits to your legislation. You mentioned at the beginning universal redemption. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and why that's so great for just residents in Michigan?
So as we all know on this webinar here, that Michigan is a great craft beer state, right? And I think the complaint that I hear the most is that it's really difficult to recycle those craft beer bottles because they're only sold in certain stores or certain facilities, and it's it's hard to redeem those. So this bill would change it to universal, so you don't have to, stores will accept whatever was produced anywhere as long as it has the Michigan 10-cent stamp on it. So I think that in and of itself is a huge improvement in this law, making it much easier for our consumers to put those bottles and cans back in the recycling stream.
So it's great legislation for the environment. It's great legislation for the recycling economy that we're trying to make, and it's great legislation to ease the burden on consumers. Representative, we really look forward to working with you over this legislative session and have high hopes for its passage. Sean, it just sounds like you just have lots of work in front of you, which is pretty normal in our shop, I think. Thank you both for joining us today. For those of you out in the audience, if you've been here, you've heard this spiel before. If you're new, you are going to get a follow-up email from us. So the questions that you've posed in the chat, the things that you put in the Q&A, we will work with Sean and Representative Morse to get those answers, and we'll send them out to you in follow-up. Hope that you join us again for another Capital Connection. It's been great to have you here. Enjoy your weekends, everybody.